not in Hawaii right now? Does it seem like everybody on your timeline is in Hawaii too? Honestly, I've been seeing way more people than usual going to Hawaii that I know, or extended friends, or people that I knew from high school, all going to Hawaii right now. But the question I've been asking myself is, why? Do they know about Hawaii's history? Most likely not. So in this video, I'm going to help you become a more mindful traveler if you're thinking about going to Hawaii, if you're in Hawaii right now, or if one of your bucket list destinations. This video is going to really make you a more mindful traveler. And again, I'm not native Hawaiian, I'm not Pacific Islander. The facts that I have in here may not be up to date. So if you are native Hawaiian, please let me know in the comments if there's anything that I missed out on. But I tried to do as much research as I could about this topic, and I'll link all the articles down below. Yeah, this is gonna be a get ready with me, and you're gonna find out more about Hawaii, why people are going there, especially in 2021, and how the tourism system needs to change there in order to be more sustainable, not only for the environment, but for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders as well. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure you stick around. Make sure you like this video. Let me know in the comments if you know about Hawaii's history, if you're thinking about going to Hawaii, or if there's anything that I missed. And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And let's get into Hawaii. All right, so let's get into the video. So honestly, I did not know how to structure this video. Usually with my Mindful Traveler series, I go directly into the history, how it became a tourist destination, and then what the tourism industry has caused in terms of problems and solutions for the destination. But Hawaii has a tricky past, a difficult history to speak about, and many Americans don't even know about it, honestly. So this video is going to be a little different in regard to my Mindful Traveler series, and we're actually gonna go and dive into why are so many people flocking to Hawaii right now, especially Americans. And I also feel like, am I the only one not going to Hawaii? You know, I'm one of those weird travelers that if I see a lot of people going to a place, I usually don't really want to go there anymore because I feel like it's already been discovered, and I also know the problems that the Instagramification of destinations ensues. So I also don't want to contribute to that. But Hawaii is one of those places that I thought about going to for a while, but all of a sudden I'm seeing a lot more people going there on my timeline. We're gonna just start off with some statistics here. And again, I'm gonna link everything down in the description where I got this data from. Again, it doesn't all come from my head, so I wanna make sure that I cite everything that I use. But just to give you some statistics here, from April 3rd to April 8th, more than 23,000 people arrived in Hawaii every day. That's a lot of people, especially because, you know, the pandemic slowed down tourism, and there hasn't been that many people there in about, I would say, a year and a half or so. So during the shutdown, summer of 2020, I believe I got this information from New York Times. Again, I'm gonna link everything. But Waikiki Beach was empty for the first time in a long time. And locals started to see, wow, like I actually could enjoy this beach. It's not filled with tourists. I could actually surf. I could enjoy it. I live here. I should be able to enjoy it. Locals really like that. And also, Hawaii in its past has dealt with a slew of its own pandemics. So if you don't know, islands usually have a harder time dealing with pandemics than, you know, mainland countries or mainland regions because the resources are finite on an island. Fast forward to May 2021, there's not even enough room to surf, and many tourists are disregarding public safety measures. So you have to wear a mask, I believe. There's social distancing rules in effect. You also have to make sure that there's not crowding in certain touristy areas, but tourists right now do not really care. This is my own opinion, but I think people don't care because they're like, oh, we could finally travel somewhere. We could finally go somewhere. I don't want to listen to any rules, especially now that I'm in paradise. I don't want to wear a mask. I don't want to socially distance. You know, and right now we're in a weird time where some people are vaccinated, some people aren't. You don't know who is and who isn't. So you just want to make sure, especially if you're a local, that you're protected. Because if you're having 23,000 people come in every single day, you don't know who's bringing what. And the locals were honestly very hesitant to start letting people back in. But of course, you know, money talks. As you've gotten to know me and watched my Mindful Traveler series, you know that the tourism industry brings a lot of money. Tourism plays an enormous role in Hawaii's economy. Just to give you some numbers, it was the largest source of private capital. In 2019, 10 million visitors flocked to Hawaii. And due to tourist spending, Hawaii made $2 billion in state tax revenue. Billion with a B. Again, though, this does not benefit locals. This usually goes to, hotel chains, hotel corporations, restaurant chains, and other entities that don't really benefit Hawaii. So unfortunately, the pandemic has hit Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders disproportionately because they accounted for 40% of the coronavirus cases in Hawaii, even though they only make up a quarter of the population. So you could see, similar to mainland America, minorities tend to affected at a higher rate. Again, the majority of Hawaiians did not want to welcome back tourists so soon. They want to make sure that their families were safe. And I think they knew that people were going to be rowdy and not listening to rules. And this isn't all tourists, but the bad tourists really make the good tourists, they make them guilty by association because you don't know who's going to follow the rules and who's not. They feel as though many Americans feel entitled to visit Hawaii, right? It's on a lot of people's bucket lists. You see a lot of couples go there for their honeymoon. This is one of those destinations that I feel that a lot of Americans agree on to visit at least once in their lifetime. But Native Hawaiians say they do not take Hawaii's history into account or barely learn it at all. And I think this is super true because I didn't know too much about Hawaii's history before I did this video, and I wanted to go to Hawaii. I most likely would have learned some of it, before I went, but most people don't really consider the history of a place, and we've talked about this in my Mindful Traveler series, especially if you are a relaxer in terms of travel profiles. You don't want to do too much research for your trip because you're looking to relax, you're looking to get away, and Hawaii is one of those places where the adventurer can go and they could do hikes and go to national parks and do all that stuff, but I feel as though most Americans and most people, when they go to Hawaii, they don't want to do that sort of stuff. They want to go to a beach, they want to relax, they want to see, the beautiful white sandy beaches, they want to see the blue ocean, and they just want to relax. So why would you do that research if you are the relaxer? Because that takes time and energy. But this video is really going to help you understand the history, and I'm going to do a brief history, and you could watch other videos, and I'll link other videos down below that I watched. This video could be 2 hours long if I go super in depth. I'm going to give you a brief history just from the American unfortunate takeover. I'm also going to try to connect it to the tourism industry and how colonialism still affects Hawaii and how it affects their tourism industry. I just feel like, to answer the question, why are so many people going to Hawaii right now? I feel like it's because not many people want to go somewhere internationally right now, for one. International travel, even if you are vaccinated, it is a scary thing to do right now. So I feel as though people don't want to go anywhere international just yet. And Hawaii has beautiful white sandy beaches, and it's a part of America. It's one of the 50 states, so it's easy to get to. You don't need a passport, and it feels like you're going far away, right? It kind of feels like you're going outside the country even though you're not, right? It's not a part of the mainland. Also, Caribbean islands right now are difficult to get to. And if they're not difficult to get to, they are implementing fees to get in order to make sure that you aren't spreading the virus and to make sure that you're quarantining or taking a test or whatever the case may be. So some Caribbean islands are inaccessible right now. So Hawaii seems to be the best bet to find a beautiful beach vacation and surpass all of these requirements or stipulations, even though Hawaii did have one of the strictest mandates of entry a few months ago. Right now, it seems to be more lax due to the rollout of the vaccine. So I think people are going there because people want to feel as though they're away from the 50 states without actually being away. Because right now, traveling internationally is scary. Also, why not do it now? People during the pandemic have realized, I want to travel. I want to make sure that I make the most of my time here on Earth. So let me go to one of my bucket list destinations that I've always wanted to go to now that the pandemic is better than it was before. So I think those are the two big reasons. People don't want to go somewhere international, but they want to feel as though they're out of the country. And then the pandemic made people realize, I don't want to work my life away. I want to make sure that I travel. So now we're going to get into the history of tourism and the colonial entanglements. So let's get into that part. So like I said before, this video literally could be 2 hours or more if I went into every single detail of the history of Hawaii. So I decided to do it more in a tourism perspective. And because, you know, I do Mindful Traveler series and I want to make sure I still relates to what I'm talking to. But if you do want to further your education on Hawaiian history and Hawaiian culture, I will link some articles down in the description. I know I keep saying that, but I just want to make sure that I'm doing Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders justice in this video. You know, this isn't just about me making sure that you're a mindful traveler, but also just making sure that somebody's land and culture is preserved and that we respect that. If you don't know already, Hawaii was not always a part of the United States, and it was its own sovereign nation. But again, being an island, it has been colonialized and taken over, you know, time and time again, and they were their own nation for a good amount of time. So in 1893, there was an American-backed coup d'etat where the Kingdom of Hawaii was recognized around the world as an independent nation. So in 1893, Hawaii was governed by a constitutional monarchy with Queen Liliuokalani as the head. However, and this, when I read this, my jaw dropped. A group of wealthy American businessmen. So in my head, I'm already like, oh, okay, we're starting to think about capitalism. Because wealthy businessmen, right? You need to have the capital to go to Hawaii, and you must have some reason to go there. Of wealthy American businessmen staged a coup d'etat that year, overthrowing Queen Liliuokalani's government and establishing their own provisional government. The president of the United States at that time, Grover Cleveland, condemned the coup, but did not force the provisional government to return power to the Hawaiian monarchy. That, to me, says, oh, you're all talk and no action. I condemn this provisional government, but you're not doing anything, right? So that means you must not really condemn the coup, right? Because you're not doing anything. And why are a group of American wealthy businessmen going over there anyways? In 1898, 5 years later, annexation by the United States after the coup d'etat overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, Native Hawaiians organized to petition the U.S. government to return power to the monarchy. So that basically means they did not want to be a part of the U.S. They were like, no, we were our own established government. What are you doing? In 1898, though, again, I'm not a history buff, but if you know your history, 1898 was when the Spanish-American War began. What do you need when war breaks out? You need a naval base. You need somewhere to refuel, right? Once the Spanish-American War began, the U.S. was like, oh, wait, maybe this wasn't a bad idea to create a provisional government there, because we could use Hawaii as a naval base and a refueling station. So Congress passed a resolution that year annexing Hawaii as a U.S. territory. Native Hawaiians did not want to be a part of the U.S. as a territory or a state or anything of that matter. They wanted to be their own independent nation. But the U.S. was like, no, we have to use them for a refueling station and naval base. In 1959, Hawaii becomes a U.S. state. And the U.S. government organized this vote in order to determine if it should become a state. But they did not have an option to return Hawaii. They did not include that on there. There was no option to say, okay, thank you for letting us to use you. Well, we had a provisional government and a territory. So it says, the U.S. government organized a vote in Hawaii to determine if the territory should become a state. This move was partially designed to prevent Hawaii from claiming independence. The vote passed, and Hawaii became the 50th U.S. state. Some dispute the legitimacy of this vote, however, because the ballot only contained 2 options: for Hawaii to stay a U.S. territory or for Hawaii to become a U.S. state. There was no option for independence, and white settlers and military personnel outnumbered Native Hawaiians at this time. So you could see from the way the ballot was created, there was no option for independence. It was like you could either become a state or a territory. Good luck. That blows my mind. And a lot of Americans go to Hawaii and they don't understand this past. They don't understand why Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders feel some sort of way toward tourists, toward Americans in general. And I hope, even though I just gave you just a slice of the history, there's even more to it. I hope that helps you realize why there is sometimes tension between tourists and Native Hawaiians. Especially now that tourists are being rowdy, they're not listening to rules, they're acting entitled. This kind of goes into the history of how Hawaii was taken over of entitlement to somebody else's land. So that's why there's kind of that same feeling, or that feeling of resentment when tourists feel entitled to do things. Because that's kind of how Hawaii was taken over. It wasn't, hey, like, thank you for your land and, you know, we're gonna make sure we preserve your culture. It was like, no, we need you as a military base and we're not gonna let you choose if you could be independent or not. Yeah, no, it's a very stark history, and I really do recommend you to learn more and to do a deep dive, but that's just a little slice. And now I'm gonna talk about how that colonialist entanglement and colonial point of view affects tourism to this day and does not help Native Hawaiians, but only helps corporations and the American perspective and not the Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander perspective. So let's get into that part of the video. So one of the most popular tourist destinations in Hawaii is Waikiki Beach. And this is one of the, most popular ones. You see this on Instagram, on Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, all that sort of stuff. So obviously there are countless resorts, luxury stores, and tourist shops. But honestly, once you're outside that Waikiki bubble, you really see what the money was spent on. And obviously, with the direction that I'm going, the money was not spent on Native Hawaiians. It was spent on the tourist experience, the tourist point of view. So you could see countless homeless people once you're outside the Waikiki bubble. You could see decaying neighborhoods. And you could also, again, this isn't something that's observable, but you could kind of experience and see the poor education system in Hawaii. Now you're probably thinking, wait, they made $2 billion in state tax revenue. Why don't they use it for that? They're not going to spend it on something that doesn't bring them their return on investment back. So unfortunately, the cost of living is extremely high for Hawaiians in Hawaii, and it's unaffordable. And with service industry jobs, it's not one of those jobs where it's specialized skill or high skill for high paying job. It's low skill, which I'm not saying that tourism jobs don't require a lot of skill, but what they consider it is low skill, low pay jobs, unfortunately. So you have this high cost of living with a low paying job. So obviously you're not going to do too well. There's also a great deal of control by large corporations of the tourism industry that does not help Native Hawaiians. Tourism obviously has harmed the environment. With large number of people visiting the reefs and the ocean, it's led to a decay of the coral reefs and even the death of some coral reefs. And a lot of tourists decide, hey, let me just leave my trash on the beach. Where do you think that ends up? Ends up right in the ocean. And we talked about this with my Dubai video and also my Cancun video. It seems as though when people are not in their hometown or somewhere that they know, they usually don't respect the land as much. So in Waikiki Beach, you have this, what I call like a tourism bubble of happiness and paradise. And the second you step out, you really do realize what the money was spent on. So remember that when you plan your vacation to Waikiki Beach, that just because it looks a certain way doesn't mean it's that way for the people who actually live there. Okay. The other important tourist destination that I wanted to talk about is Diamond Head State Monument. This is another one that people like to go to when they go to Hawaii. And in 2019, more than 1.2 million people visited the site. That's a lot of people in a short amount of time. As word gets out about specific tourist destinations, it obviously became more frustrating as a tourist to get in there because there's these tour buses, there's people driving, there's people walking, and there's really no good regulation of, counting the number of people that go in and making sure that there's not too many people at a time. It became a very frustrating experience for tourists, but I could only imagine as a local how frustrating that could be. You could also see wear and tear starting to happen at the summit because people started to bring their trash up there. and they did not follow the rules of, what you bring in is what you take out. And they're like, oh, I'm already at the top, so let me just throw it out. So you could see the wear and tear on the natural environment due to the high number of tourists who were kind of like, I don't care. There were also, a park ranger was interviewed for this article. They claim that it became more and more difficult, and it actually happened more and more often, unfortunately, that there were badly behaved guests who were difficult to deal with. And I think that really does wear on you after a while. I mean, I work in the restaurant industry, and if you work in the service industry, you know what it's like to deal with bad guests. It's tiring. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time. It makes you cynical, honestly. I could only imagine on a daily basis dealing with badly behaved guests, how that makes you feel toward tourists. There's this also, which I shouldn't be laughing, but it's just trying to be a mindful traveler and just reading about how certain tourists treat locals really makes me sad. So there were some guests who did not stay hydrated enough for the hike and had to be rescued. You're going on a hike, like in a hot region, and you decided not to bring water? You decided not to drink water throughout the day, so you have to be rescued? Are you kidding me? Like, what? I just give that park ranger a ton of credit, because I would have just been done by like week 3. I've been like, okay, that's about it. I've seen enough here. It's not going too well. There are ways, and they presented this in the article, and I like that. There are ways to reduce tourists without saying, don't come here. And I think the unfortunate beauty of the pandemic is that things got to pause for a minute. We got to see what it was like when people weren't traveling. And I think Hawaiians realize that. Whoa, I can enjoy the beach that I live near. I don't have to deal with badly behaved tourists. I don't have to deal with crowds. So I think this made people realize, whoa, let's reevaluate the tourism sector. So in the next part of this video, I'm going to try to present solutions that the article mentions, and also my own solutions for when you go to Hawaii. So let's get into that. I just want to say thank you for getting to the last part of this video. I know this is a tough topic, and when you're traveling, sometimes you want to just hear about the happy-go-lucky moments and how beautiful it is, but honestly, we can't be mindful travelers if we don't see the full picture. So I just want to say thank you for getting to this part, and thank you for watching this video. Alright, so for the last part of this video, we're going to get into solutions, things we could do, and just maybe even further questions for other places, because as I was doing this research, I realized that there are a lot of places that are similar in Hawaii in the fact that they're dealing with over-tourism. The pandemic made people realize, hey, we don't need to destroy the very thing or the very reason why people come here. So the key thing that the article describes is retrieving data. And I am a huge proponent of data and statistics. You have to make sure you're doing it in the right way, because honestly, you can tell a skewed story with numbers if you don't analyze the data correctly. There should be more travel data out there in order to understand how long tourists stay in your region. What activities do your tourists do? Where your tourists come from? What age group? What demographic are your tourists? Do they know about your history? Those are key data points and suggestions to retrieve so that you better understand who's coming to your country or state or island and why. Data right now for the tourism sector is basically, how many tourists you receive a day, you receive in a year, how much money you made. It's not really understanding of the demographics, the income level, where your tourists are coming from. And I think those are important things to keep in mind, especially after the pandemic, to make sure that you keep track of this. Again, it is difficult, but I think it really would pay off. And there are ways to reduce tourists without saying do not come here. So some of the articles that I read said, for some national parks in Hawaii, there's a reservation system. And now with the pandemic, more and more national parks are doing a reservation system. So Diamond Head State Monument created a reservation system because you could limit the number of people that are going, right? You could say, okay, only 200 people are allowed to go on Fridays, maybe 250 on Saturdays, 250 Sunday, instead of just having everybody and their mother come in. They also created a pedestrian walkway in order to encourage people to walk to the monument instead of drive. And lastly, they raised prices for non-residents. So that's kind of nice. If you're a resident, A, you get a cheaper price, but B, if you're a non-resident, maybe that would sway you to not go to that monument, do something else, or maybe you'll just get people who are more mindful about it and care about it since they're paying to get in. So even in 2018, because obviously a lot of these videos that I watched are from before the pandemic happened, they knew that there was an issue. Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. They knew there was an issue with the tourism industry, and I think the New York Times article that I read has 3 different groups. They're the people who say, no tourist should ever come here again. We don't want anybody. The tourism industry, yes, brings a lot of money, but it brings too much detriment, and we want to preserve our culture and our land and our environment. Then you have the people in the middle who are like, well, I understand that point of view, but tourism does bring a lot of money. Let's have a sustainable tourism model. And then there are people on the third camp who are like, no, let's just, kind of let tourism run how it goes. It brings us money, and it's unfortunate what's happening, but it is what it is. So I think I'd honestly be in one, either the first camp of like, no, don't come here, or 2, having a different tourism model. Because a lot of these places, when I say these places, I'm talking about Hawaii, Venice, Barcelona. These places are dealing with mass over tourism, and it's destroying their culture and their land. And it's destroying the very reason why people go. And as a local, you want to make sure you can enjoy it as well. Like, yes, you might want tourists to come in, but you also want to enjoy it yourself. It kind of feels like outsiders are using your land, which goes back to the colonialist entanglements, because you can't even enjoy your own land. And Americans just took your nation because there was a war starting. And Native Hawaiians know this history, but many Americans don't. So it's kind of, all of these Mindful Traveler series videos, they're not easy problems to bring solutions to. So I definitely think data will help. I think changing the tourism model to become more sustainable will help. But I think you need to understand the perspective of Native Hawaiians. And I think I say this in every Mindful Traveler series, but knowing the history, knowing about the locals, knowing how your social footprint or ecological footprint affects somebody else is important. I think sometimes, Americans get known as one of the worst tourists. I don't know if it's gotten better. I really haven't done research on it. But I just remember as a kid just knowing that as an American, a lot of people, don't really want you somewhere because of our past, and also because we don't educate ourselves before we go somewhere. So I think the most important thing is to educate ourselves, learn about the history of a place, learn about the American influence or American kind of infiltration of places, because you don't get that in history class. It's like, oh, America's great, America's this, which again, I'm grateful to be living here, but you have to realize that there's no country that's perfect. There are going to be people who see you as an American and see that as a bad thing. And it's not necessarily your fault, right? It's not, I didn't get to choose where I was born. I didn't get to choose the history. But I think if you educate yourself and try to talk to locals and respect their culture and respect their land, I think that could be a step forward in the right direction. So I just want to end this video using a quote from one of the articles that I read. And it says, Native Hawaiians say that since Europeans first arrived in the 18th century, Hawaiian land has been taken and misused by non-Hawaiians, and often to the detriment of Hawaiians and their traditions. The endeavors that have sparked these recent protests all promise jobs, just as tourism and defense have in the past. But jobs are not enough. That really left me with something to think about, right? That's kind of the argument usually when it comes to tourism or any other new industries. Oh, we'll create jobs, we'll create jobs. Well, sometimes that's just not enough. Sometimes jobs are not enough, and we really do have to open our ears, close our mouths, and listen to what Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have to say. There's a dark history in Hawaii. You could get to know it with the articles in the description. I really hope this video helps you when you go to Hawaii, and to be a more mindful traveler, to come from a place of understanding. And I understand Hawaii is one of those places where you want to go and just relax and not worry. But just remember, every place has a history. Every place has Native people and locals who might not be super welcoming to you, and sometimes it's just better to understand why. So I'm not asking you to change the world, but I really hope this video helped. Whew. There was a lot of research that went behind this video, and please make sure you like it. Let me know in the comments what you think, if I left anything out. Again, I didn't want this video to be 2 or 3 hours long, but I'm just gonna link as many things as I can in the description. And yeah, I hope this video helps, and thank you so much for your continued support. My videos have been doing extremely well, at least from my perspective. I know 100 views might not be successful to some people, but multiple videos have hit over 100, so I just want to say thank you. Make sure you hit subscribe and hit that notification bell, and until next time.